Chapter 1. Blood in the Snow. The scent of betrayal clung to Lyra's clothes like smoke from a dying fire. She pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient pine, her breath coming in ragged puffs that crystallized in the frigid mountain air. Blood seeped through the torn fabric of her jacket where claws had found their mark, not from some wild animal, but from the very people she'd called family for 23 years. How could they? The question echoed in her mind as she forced herself to keep moving through the dense forest. Each step sent jolts of pain through her injured shoulder, but stopping meant death. Marcus had made that abundantly clear when he'd looked her in the eyes. Those same amber eyes that had once gazed at her with what she'd foolishly believed was love, and declared her a traitor to the Shadowmere pack. "You have 1 hour," he'd said, his voice cold as the winter wind that now whipped through her dark hair. "After that, we hunt. 1 hour." As if 23 years of loyalty, of following every rule, of sacrificing her own dreams for the good of the pack, could be erased in 60 minutes. Lyra stumbled over a fallen log, catching herself against a snow-laden branch that dumped its contents down the back of her neck. The shock of cold made her gasp, but it also sharpened her focus. She couldn't afford to think about Marcus right now, or about Elena's satisfied smirk as the pack had closed ranks around their new alpha female. She couldn't dwell on how easily they'd all believed the lies. She had to survive. The forest stretched endlessly before her, a maze of shadows and silver moonlight. These were the borderlands, the no-man's territory between pack holdings where rogues and outcasts scratched out desperate existences. It was the last place any sane shifter would venture, especially alone and injured. But Lyra wasn't exactly sane anymore. Betrayal had a way of burning away sanity, leaving only raw determination in its wake. A branch snapped somewhere behind her, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the stillness. She froze, every muscle tensing as she strained to listen. The wind carried scents she recognized. Pine, snow, and underneath it all, the musky warmth of Shifter. Her former packmates were tracking her already. So much for an hour. She pushed forward, ignoring the way her legs shook with exhaustion. The terrain grew rougher as she climbed higher into the mountains, following what might have once been a deer trail, but was now little more than a suggestion between the trees. Her human form was ill-equipped for this kind of punishment, but shifting would only make her easier to track. Her wolf's scent would carry for miles, a beacon for Marcus and his hunters. Another sound made her pause, this time from ahead rather than behind. A low growl that seemed to rumble up from the earth itself, so deep she felt it in her bones. Lyra's blood turned to ice as yellow eyes materialized from the darkness between two massive boulders. A wolf, but not one of her former packmates. This creature was enormous, easily twice the size of any shifter she'd ever seen. Its coat was midnight black except for silver markings along its muzzle and chest that seemed to glow in the moonlight. When it stepped into view, muscles rippled beneath thick fur, and she could see scars crisscrossing its hide, evidence of countless battles. The wolf's massive head tilted as it studied her, nostrils flaring as it scented the blood and fear that clung to her. Those predatory eyes held an intelligence that was distinctly, terrifyingly human. Lyra's hand moved instinctively to the silver knife at her belt, the only weapon she'd managed to grab before fleeing. The blade would be useless against something this size, but dying with a weapon in her hand seemed preferable to being torn apart defensively. "Easy," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the wolf or herself. "I'm just passing through." The creature's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing fangs that could easily tear her throat out. But instead of attacking, it did something completely unexpected. It sat. Like some oversized dog, The massive wolf lowered its haunches to the snow and continued watching her with those unnerving yellow eyes. Its head cocked to one side as if it were genuinely curious about her presence in its territory. "What are you?" she breathed. The sound of approaching voices carried on the wind. Marcus's voice among them, sharp with authority as he directed the hunt. They were closing in fast, following her trail through the snow with the efficiency of predators who knew these mountains intimately. The black wolf's ears pricked forward at the sound, and something shifted in its posture. The lazy curiosity vanished, replaced by a tension that spoke of imminent violence. A growl began building in its chest, so low and menacing that Lyra felt her knees go weak. "There!" Marcus's voice carried clearly now. "Her scent leads this way." Panic clawed at Lyra's throat. She was trapped between two threats: her former pack closing in from behind, and this mysterious predator blocking her path forward. The smart thing would be to try running parallel to the ridge, but her injured body was already at its limit. The wolf rose to its feet with fluid grace, its massive form seeming to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. For a heartbeat, Lyra was certain it would attack, that her flight from one death would only lead to another. Instead, the creature moved aside. It stepped off the trail and into the deeper shadows between the trees, leaving the path clear. But those yellow eyes never left her face, and in their depths she saw something that made her breath catch. Intelligence, purpose, and perhaps most unsettling of all, recognition. As if this creature knew exactly who she was and why she was running. "This way." Marcus's voice was closer now, perhaps only a few hundred yards behind her. Lyra didn't hesitate. She plunged forward down the trail, her boots sliding on loose stones as the path grew steeper. Behind her, she heard the black wolf following, not hunting, but shadowing her movements with the silent grace of its kind. She should have been terrified. Everything about this situation screamed danger, from the predator at her back to the unknown territory ahead. But as the sounds of pursuit faded behind them, Lyra felt something she hadn't experienced since Marcus had looked at her with cold amber eyes and declared her worthless. She felt protected. The trail leveled out as it wound around a massive outcropping of granite, and through the trees ahead, Lyra caught a glimpse of warm light. A cabin, she realized with a surge of desperate hope. Someone lived out here in this wilderness, far from pack politics and territorial disputes. The black wolf had stopped following her, she noticed. When she glanced back, all she could see were shadows and silver moonlight filtering through the pines. But she could feel its presence watching from the darkness. A guardian she neither understood nor trusted, but was grateful for nonetheless. As she stumbled toward the distant light, one thought echoed in her mind with crystal clarity. Her old life was over. Whatever came next would either save her or destroy her completely. The cabin's windows glowed like beacons in the wilderness, promising warmth and safety she desperately needed. But Lyra had learned tonight that promises could be broken as easily as bones. She was about to discover that some promises, however, were forged in something far stronger than words. They were written in blood and moonlight, and they would change everything. Chapter 2. The Stranger's Sanctuary. The cabin door opened before Lyra could even raise her fist to knock. A man filled the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that seemed to command the very air around him. Dark hair fell across his forehead in disheveled waves, and when he looked at her, his eyes were the color of storm clouds just before lightning struck. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice a low rumble that reminded her uncomfortably of the growl she'd heard in the forest. Lyra swayed on her feet, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion and pain. I'm sorry to bother you. I just need..." Strong hands caught her as her knees buckled, and suddenly she was being lifted as if she weighed nothing at all. The scent that enveloped her was pine and leather, wild and untamed in a way that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. "Easy," he murmured, carrying her inside with fluid grace. "I've got you." The cabin's interior was warm and masculine, leather furniture arranged before a stone fireplace, thick rugs covering polished wood floors, and shelves lined with books that looked well-read rather than decorative. He set her gently on a leather sofa near the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his angular features. "What's your name?" he asked, already moving toward what she assumed was a kitchen area. "Lyra." The name felt strange on her tongue now, as if her identity had been stripped away along with her pack status. "And you are?" "Kieran." He returned with a first aid kit and a glass of water, settling onto the coffee table across from her. "Let me see that shoulder." She should have been more cautious. Everything about this situation screamed danger. A lone shifter living in the borderlands, the way he'd opened the door as if he'd been expecting her, the predatory grace in his movements. But she was injured, exhausted, and for the first time in hours, she felt safe. "How did you know I was coming?" she asked as he helped her out of her torn jacket. Kieran's hands stilled for just a moment. "I heard the commotion in the forest. Voices. Sounded like a hunt." His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he examined her wounds, but she didn't miss the way his jaw tightened when he saw the claw marks. These weren't random scratches. They formed a deliberate pattern that any shifter would recognize as a mark of exile. "Your own pack did this to you," he said, and it wasn't a question. Lyra's throat tightened. "Former pack. And yes." "Why?" The simple question opened a floodgate of pain she'd been trying to hold back. "Because I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know. Because I trusted the wrong person. Because I was stupid enough to believe that 23 years of loyalty meant something." Kieran began cleaning her wounds with antiseptic, his touch clinical but somehow comforting. Loyalty is a rare thing. Too many people confuse it with blind obedience. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to make you understand that whatever you discovered, whatever you did, it took courage. And courage always comes with a price." She studied his profile as he worked, noting the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught the firelight. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. Perhaps it was simply the way he moved, like a predator barely contained in human skin. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "I prefer solitude." His gray eyes flicked to hers briefly. "Most people find me intense." Despite everything, Lyra almost smiled. "I'm starting to think intense might be exactly what I need right now." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or interest. "Tell me about this discovery that cost you everything." The antiseptic stung, but not as much as the memory. "My pack's alpha was making deals with hunters. Not just any hunters, the kind that specialize in shifters. He was selling information about rival packs' territories, their weaknesses, in exchange for protection from human authorities." Kieran's hands went very still. Marcus Aldrich of the Shadowmere pack. It wasn't a question, and the fact that he knew Marcus's name sent a chill down her spine. "How do you... Marcus and I have... history." His voice carried an edge that made her wolf whimper in instinctive submission. "Continue." "I overheard him making arrangements with someone called the Hunter. They were planning to ambush the Crescent Moon Pack during their annual gathering. Entire families would have been slaughtered." She closed her eyes, remembering the cold calculation in Marcus's voice as he'd discussed the logistics of genocide. "I couldn't let that happen." "So you warned them?" "I tried to. But Elena, Marcus's new mate, she intercepted my message. convinced the pack that I was the one collaborating with hunters, that I was trying to frame Marcus to cover my own betrayal. Lyra's laugh was bitter. They believed her. Of course they did. She's beautiful, powerful, from a prominent bloodline. And I'm just nobody. Kieran's hands framed her face suddenly, forcing her to meet his storm-gray eyes. You're not nobody. You're the woman who was willing to sacrifice everything to save innocent lives. That makes you extraordinary. The intensity in his gaze stole her breath. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his irises, could feel the barely leashed power that seemed to radiate from his skin. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but not from fear. I don't even know you, she whispered. No, he agreed, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. But I know courage when I see it. And I know what it's like to be betrayed by the people you trusted most. Something in his tone made her suspect there was a story there. One written in the same language of pain and betrayal that she understood all too well. But before she could ask, he was pulling away, returning his attention to her injuries with professional detachment. You saved the Crescent Moon Pack, he said as he applied bandages with efficient precision. They owe you a debt they'll never be able to repay. How do you know I succeeded? A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Because if Marcus had gotten to them, the entire mountain range would reek of blood and smoke right now. Instead, I smell only snow and pine, and fear. Marcus is afraid, Lyra. That's why he's hunting you so desperately. Afraid of what? I'm just one exiled shifter with no pack, no allies, no... You're a witness. More than that, you're living proof that his perfect facade can crack. As long as you're alive, you're a threat to everything he's built. The implications of his words settled over her like a shroud. Marcus wouldn't stop hunting her. This wasn't just about exile. It was about elimination. Then I'm dead anyway, she said quietly. He has an entire pack at his disposal. I have nothing. Kieran finished securing the last bandage and sat back, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed and protected at the same time. You have me. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications she didn't dare examine too closely. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf's cry echoed across the mountains, lonely, haunting, and somehow familiar. Why would you help me? She asked. You don't know me. For all you know, Elena was right, and I am a traitor. Kieran stood and moved to the window, gazing out into the moonlit forest. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain and older promises. Because 20 years ago, someone I cared about tried to expose Marcus Aldrich's corruption. She died for it, and I've been waiting ever since for someone brave enough to finish what she started. The fire crackled in the sudden silence, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. Lyra wanted to ask who the woman had been, what exactly had happened, why Kieran was living alone in the borderlands like some mythical guardian. But before she could voice any of those questions, a sound cut through the night that made her blood freeze. Howls. Multiple voices joining in a hunting song that spoke of blood and vengeance. Marcus had found her trail. Kieran turned from the window, and in the firelight, his eyes seemed to glow with an inner flame. It's time you learned exactly who you're dealing with, Lyra, and why Marcus Aldrich should be very, very afraid. Chapter 3. The Alpha's Truth. The howls grew closer, harmonizing in a deadly symphony that spoke of coordinated pursuit. Lyra counted at least 6 distinct voices in the hunting song, their calls echoing off the mountain peaks like a promise of violence. Kieran moved away from the window with predatory grace, but instead of reaching for weapons or preparing defenses, he began unbuttoning his flannel shirt. What are you doing? Lyra struggled to her feet, ignoring the spike of pain from her injured shoulder. What I should have done 20 years ago. His voice carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Stay inside, Lyra. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, stay inside. You can't face 6 shifters alone. I won't be alone. He shrugged out of his shirt, revealing a torso that was a roadmap of scars and lean muscle. But it was the tattoo across his shoulders that made her breath catch. An intricate design of a wolf's head surrounded by silver runes that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. I'll have my pack with me. Your pack? But you said you lived alone. The sound of splintering wood cut off her words as the cabin door exploded inward. Marcus stood framed in the doorway, his amber eyes blazing with fury and triumph. Behind him, 5 other Shadowmere wolves crowded the threshold, their human forms tense with barely contained violence. Well, well, Marcus drawled, his gaze moving from Lyra's bandaged form to Kieran's half-dressed state. The little traitor has found herself a protector. How touching. Kieran stepped between them, and something about his posture made every wolf in the doorway take a involuntary step back. Even Marcus, for all his alpha arrogance, seemed suddenly uncertain. Marcus. Kieran's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. Still compensating for your inadequacies by hunting defenseless women, I see. Defenseless? Marcus laughed, but there was a strained quality to it. She's a traitor who nearly cost us a lucrative partnership. And you... His nostrils flared as he scented the air, and his face went white. It can't be. Can't be what? But even as Lyra asked the question, she was beginning to understand. The massive black wolf in the forest. Kieran's knowledge of Marcus's business. The way every shifter in the room was now radiating submission despite their superior numbers. Kieran Blackthorn, Marcus whispered, and the name fell like a stone into still water. The ghost of Blood Moon Ridge. But you're supposed to be dead. Lyra's world tilted. Kieran Blackthorn, every shifter knew that name. The legendary alpha who had single-handedly destroyed 3 corrupt packs, who had vanished 20 years ago after his mate was murdered. Some said he'd gone rogue. Others claimed he'd died of grief. But according to the stories, he had been the most powerful alpha in North America. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Kieran's eyes were beginning to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the fireplace. Though the same won't be said of you if you don't leave. Now. You can't protect her forever, Blackthorn. She knows too much, and my business partners don't appreciate loose ends. Your business partners. Kieran's voice dropped to a growl that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. You mean the hunters who killed my mate. The same ones paying you to sell out your own kind. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus's pack members were backing toward the door now, their alpha bravado crumbling in the face of something far older and more dangerous than anything they'd encountered. That was different, Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Sarah was... He never got to finish the sentence. Kieran moved faster than Lyra's eyes could follow, crossing the room in a blur of motion that ended with his hand wrapped around Marcus's throat. Say her name again, Kieran whispered, and his voice carried the promise of death. I dare you. Marcus clawed at Kieran's grip, his face turning purple as his pack watched in frozen horror. None of them moved to help their alpha. They were too busy trying not to trigger the apex predator currently holding their leader's life in his hands. Sarah died because she tried to expose your corruption, Kieran continued, his grip loosening just enough to let Marcus breathe. She had evidence of your collaboration with the hunters, so you arranged for her to have an accident during a routine patrol. You can't prove? I don't need to prove anything. Kieran's eyes were fully wolf now, glowing amber in the firelight. Justice doesn't require a courtroom when it comes to the murder of a mate. Behind them, Lyra watched in fascination and growing understanding. Sarah hadn't just been someone Kieran cared about. She'd been his mate. His other half. And Marcus had destroyed her just as he'd tried to destroy Lyra. "Please," Marcus gasped. "It wasn't personal. It was just business." The sound that came from Kieran's throat was nothing human. It was the roar of an enraged apex predator, and it shattered every window in the cabin. The pack members at the door scattered like leaves in a hurricane, their nerve finally breaking completely. But Kieran didn't kill Marcus. Instead, he released him so suddenly that the younger alpha collapsed to his knees, gasping and clutching his throat. "Run," Kieran said quietly. "Take your coward's pack and run. Because if I see you on my territory again, if I even smell your scent on the wind, I'll finish what I started 20 years ago." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his amber eyes wide with terror. "This isn't over, Blackthorn. My partners won't stand for... Your partners can come find me anytime they like." Kieran's smile was all teeth and terrible promise. "I've been waiting 20 years for a reunion." Marcus fled, his pack scattering into the night like shadows before dawn. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whistle of wind through the broken windows and the steady crackle of the fire. Kieran stood motionless for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. When he finally turned to face Lyra, his eyes had returned to their storm-gray color, but she could still see the wolf lurking just beneath the surface. "Now you know," he said simply. Lyra stared at him. This legendary figure she'd heard whispered about in pack stories. This ghost who had stepped out of myth to save her life. "You're him. You're actually him. Does it change anything?" The question was carefully neutral, but she could hear the vulnerability underneath. He was waiting for her to recoil, to fear him the way Marcus and his pack had. Instead, Lyra crossed the room and reached up to touch the tattoo across his shoulders. Those silver runes that marked him as something far more than an ordinary alpha. "It changes everything," she whispered, "but not in the way you think." His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, and she felt him shudder at her touch. "Lyra." "She was lucky to have you," she said softly. "Sarah. To have someone who loved her enough to spend 20 years seeking justice for her death." Something cracked in his carefully controlled expression. "I failed her. I should have been there. Should have protected her." "You can't protect everyone from everything. Trust me, I learned that lesson tonight." Her hand moved to rest over his heart, feeling the steady thunder of his pulse. "But you saved me. And you've been protecting innocent shifters for 20 years by staying out here. By being the monster that monsters fear." "I'm not a good man, Lyra. The things I've done, the blood on my hands. You're the man who opened his door to a stranger, who patched up my wounds and offered me sanctuary, who faced down 6 shifters to protect someone he barely knew." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You're exactly the kind of man I need right now." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that had nothing to do with protection and everything to do with the connection sparking between them like electricity in the mountain air. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. Not Marcus's pack, but something wild and free. Kieran's head tilted slightly, listening to voices she couldn't hear. "They're coming," he said, but there was no tension in his posture now. "Who?" His smile was different this time, warm instead of terrifying, genuine instead of predatory. "My real pack. The ones who've been waiting 20 years for me to stop hiding and start living again." As if summoned by his words, shapes began emerging from the forest. wolves of every size and color, their eyes reflecting the firelight as they gathered in the clearing around the cabin. Not a traditional pack bound by blood or territory, but something else entirely. Outcasts, rogues, survivors who had found each other in the wilderness and formed bonds stronger than any bloodline. "Welcome to the Blackthorn Pack, Lyra," Kieran said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Where the broken come to heal, and the lost come to find their way home." Chapter 4. Among the Lost Souls. Dawn painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold, but Lyra barely noticed the beauty. She was too busy trying to process the impossible scene before her. Kieran's pack had transformed back to human form with the sunrise, and now she found herself surrounded by the most unlikely collection of shifters she'd ever encountered. There was Sage, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and scars that spoke of old battles, who'd immediately taken charge of preparing breakfast. Finn, barely more than a teenager, moved with the nervous energy of someone still learning to control his wolf. And then there was Reaper, a mountain of a man whose very presence made the air feel dangerous, though he'd been nothing but gentle when he'd helped repair the cabin's shattered windows. "You're staring," Kieran murmured, settling beside her on the porch steps with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I'm trying to understand." Lyra accepted the warmth gratefully, using the mug to warm her hands. "This isn't how packs work. You have wolves from different bloodlines, different territories. Some of them can't be more than 20. Others look like they've been fighting for decades." "Traditional packs are built on blood and territory," Kieran agreed, his shoulder brushing against hers. "This pack is built on choice. On the belief that family isn't something you're born into, it's something you create." Through the open door, she could hear Sage telling Finn a story about a hunt gone wrong, their laughter mixing with the sizzle of bacon in the pan. It was domestic and warm in a way that made her chest ache with longing. "How long have they been with you?" Sage was the first. Found her about 15 years ago, half dead from silver poisoning after her own pack tried to sacrifice her to appease some humans they'd wronged. Kieran's voice carried old anger. "Finn's been here 3 years. His parents kicked him out when his wolf proved to be smaller than pack standards demanded. Reaper... He paused, watching the giant man carefully position a new window pane. Reaper was a fighter in the underground rings, used and discarded when he refused to throw a match. Each story was a thread in a tapestry of pain and redemption that somehow created something beautiful. And they all just... stay? They stay because they want to. They leave when they're ready." Kieran turned to study her face. "No one is ever trapped here, Lyra. That's the whole point." The implication was clear. She wasn't a prisoner, despite everything that had happened. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it filled her with an unexpected panic. Where else would she go? What else did she have left? "You're thinking too loud," a new voice said from behind them. Lyra turned to find Sage approaching with a plate of food and a knowing smile. The older woman moved with the fluid grace of a dominant wolf, but there was warmth in her amber eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "Sorry," Lyra said, accepting the breakfast gratefully. "I'm still processing all of this." "Pack politics will mess with your head," Sage agreed, settling on Kieran's other side with casual familiarity. "Especially when you've been raised to believe that bloodlines and hierarchy are the only things that matter. It takes time to unlearn that kind of conditioning." "How long did it take you?" Sage's laugh was rueful. "About 5 years to stop looking over my shoulder for permission to exist. Another 5 to realize I was allowed to have opinions. And maybe 10 more to understand that strength doesn't always come from dominance." Kieran's hand found Lyra's free one, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Rest. Heal. Figure out what you want your life to look like. What if what I want isn't realistic? The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks as both wolves turned to study her with interest. Depends on what it is, Sage said diplomatically, though the amused glint in her eyes suggested she had her suspicions. Lyra's gaze drifted to where Finn was attempting to help Reaper with the windows. His eager chatter met with patient grunts from the larger man. The scene was so normal, so familial, that it made her heart clench with want. I used to dream about having a real family, she admitted quietly. Not just a pack bound by duty and tradition, but people who chose to be together because they cared. Because they wanted to protect each other. Not because some ancient law said they had to. Kieran's thumb traced circles against her palm, sending warmth shooting up her arm. That doesn't sound unrealistic at all. Doesn't it? I'm a packless wolf with no territory, no resources, no allies except... She gestured vaguely at the cabin and its occupants. Except the most feared alpha in North America and his hand-picked family of misfits? Sage's tone was dry but not unkind. Honey, you could do a lot worse for allies. Before Lyra could respond, Finn came bounding up the steps with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever puppy. Sage, Reaper wants to know if we have any more of that special putty for the window frames. And also he said to tell you that the perimeter sensors picked up movement about 2 miles south. But it was just a family of actual wolves, so nothing to worry about. But he thought you should know anyway because... Breathe, pup, Sage said with fond exasperation. The putty's in the supply shed, and tell Reaper thank you for the report. Finn nodded eagerly and bounded away again, leaving Lyra staring after him with a mixture of amusement and envy. He's so... happy, she said wonderingly. He's safe, Kieran corrected. For the first time in his life, he knows he's not going to be rejected for who he is. It makes all the difference. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. Safety. When was the last time she'd felt truly safe? Even before the betrayal, she'd always been walking on eggshells around the pack, trying to be useful enough to justify her existence. I keep waiting for the catch, she confessed. For someone to tell me what I have to do to earn my place here, what role I'm expected to fill. Sage and Kieran exchanged a look over her head, one of those wordless communications that spoke of years of friendship and shared understanding. The only expectation here is that you be yourself, Sage said finally. Whatever that looks like. And if I don't know who that is anymore, then you figure it out, Kieran said simply. However long it takes. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sounds of pack life continuing around them. Lyra found herself studying Kieran's profile as he watched his people go about their morning routines. There was contentment in his expression, but also a kind of watchful alertness that never fully relaxed. Do you ever regret it? She asked impulsively. Giving up your old life to build this? Which part? Losing everything I thought mattered, or finding something better in the ruins? The question was posed lightly, but she could hear the deeper currents underneath. Both, I suppose. Kieran was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 decades worth of reflection. I regret not seeing Marcus's corruption sooner. I regret not being able to save Sarah. I regret the years I spent consumed by vengeance instead of learning how to live again. His fingers tightened around hers. But I don't regret ending up here. With them. With you. The last 2 words were spoken so softly she almost missed them, but they hit her with the force of a physical blow. Heat flooded her cheeks as she turned to meet his storm-gray eyes, finding an intensity there that made her breath catch. Kieran. I know it's too soon, he said quickly. I know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is pressure from someone you barely know. But I wanted you to understand that what happened to you, what brought you here, it wasn't just chance. Some things are meant to be. You believe in fate. I believe in second chances. And I believe that sometimes the universe puts the right people in each other's paths when they need it most. His smile was soft, almost shy. Maybe that's the same thing. From inside the cabin came the sound of Reaper's booming laughter at something Finn had said, followed by Sage's delighted cackle, the sounds of a family comfortable with each other, secure in their bonds. I want to stay, Lyra said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. I want to be part of this. Of whatever this is between us. Kieran's breath left him in a rush, as if he'd been holding it without realizing. Are you sure? I'm sure that I've never felt as safe as I do right now. I'm sure that you've shown me more kindness in 12 hours than my birth pack showed me in 23 years. She turned to face him fully, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. And I'm sure that if I walk away from this, from you, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The kiss was soft, tentative, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Sage was pointedly looking in the other direction, though her smile was visible in profile. Welcome home, Lyra, Kieran whispered against her lips. For as long as you want to stay. Forever, she thought but didn't say. The word felt too big, too soon, too much like tempting fate. But as she settled back against his side and watched his pack, their pack, go about their morning, forever didn't seem nearly long enough. Chapter 5. Secrets in Silver and Shadow. 3 days later, Lyra discovered that Paradise could still harbor nightmares. She woke to the sound of Kieran thrashing beside her, his body locked in the grip of whatever demons haunted his sleep. They'd been sharing his bed since that first night, not making love, but simply holding each other through the darkness. For both of them, the presence of another heartbeat seemed to keep the worst memories at bay. Until now. Sarah, he whispered, the name torn from his throat like a prayer or a curse. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lyra's heart clenched as she watched him fight battles only he could see. She'd learned not to wake him too abruptly. Sage had warned her that startling an alpha in the middle of a nightmare was a good way to end up pinned against a wall with claws at her throat. Instead, she placed her hand gently on his chest and spoke his name softly. Kieran, you're safe. You're home. His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused for a moment before they found hers. The pain in them was so raw it made her breath catch. I could have saved her, he said quietly, his voice rough with sleep and grief. If I'd just listened to my instincts instead of trusting Marcus's lies. Tell me, she whispered. Tell me what really happened. For a long moment she thought he might refuse. The muscles in his jaw worked as he struggled with whatever memories were clawing at him. But then he sank back against the pillows, his arm tightening around her as if she were an anchor in a storm. Sarah wasn't just my mate, he began, his voice distant. She was my conscience, my better half in every way that mattered. Where I saw problems that needed to be solved with force, she saw people who needed help. She had this gift for seeing the truth of things. Lyra pressed closer, offering what comfort she could as he navigated the minefield of his past. She started noticing things about Marcus, inconsistencies in his stories, gaps in patrol schedules that didn't make sense, and then shifters from other packs started disappearing. Not rogues or criminals, but good wolves. Families with young cubs. Healers. People who would be missed. The cabin was silent except for the whisper of wind through the pines and Kieran's quiet voice painting pictures of a horror Lyra was only beginning to understand. Sarah started investigating on her own. She was careful, discreet. But Marcus had allies in places we never suspected. When she finally gathered enough evidence to prove he was selling information to hunters, locations of dens, pack hierarchies, who was vulnerable, she came to me. What did you do? I told her we needed to be smart about it, that we should gather more evidence before making accusations against an alpha. I told her to wait. His laugh was bitter as winter wind. I told her to be patient while wolves were being slaughtered because of information Marcus provided. Lyra could hear the self-recrimination in his voice, 20 years of guilt condensed into those few words. You were trying to protect her. I was trying to protect my own position, he corrected harshly. I was young, arrogant, convinced that I could handle Marcus politically rather than confronting him directly. Sarah wanted to take the evidence to the council immediately. I convinced her to wait just a few more days while I tried to find a way that wouldn't tear the alliance apart. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of decisions that could never be undone. The next morning, she went for her usual run through the northern territory. They found her body 3 hours later, torn apart by what looked like a rogue attack. But I knew. His voice dropped to a whisper. I knew the wounds were too precise, too clinical. Hunters had killed her, and Marcus had told them exactly where to find her. Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes. Did you confront him? I tried, but he was clever. Had alibis, witnesses, explanations for everything. Made it look like grief was making me paranoid. And the council? Kieran's arms tightened around her. The council decided that accusing a fellow alpha of conspiring with hunters was too dangerous for pack unity. They buried the investigation along with Sarah. So you left. I burned it all down. There was dark satisfaction in his voice now. Not just my pack, Marcus's allies, his financial networks, every corrupt alpha who'd turned a blind eye to his activities. It took me 3 years to systematically destroy everything he'd built. By the time I was done, he was a laughable remnant of his former power. But he rebuilt. Smarter this time. More careful. And Kieran turned to face her fully, his storm-gray eyes haunted. I disappeared into these mountains because I couldn't bear the thought of failing someone else the way I failed her. Lyra studied his face in the pale dawn light filtering through the windows. Is that what you think you did? Failed her? I let politics and caution override love and justice. If I'd supported her immediately, if I'd acted when she first brought me the evidence, you'd probably both be dead. Lyra interrupted gently. Marcus wouldn't have hesitated to eliminate both of you if he'd felt truly threatened. At least this way. You lived to keep fighting him. Kieran's smile was sad but grateful. You sound like her. Sarah always believed in seeing the bigger picture, in finding hope even in the darkest situations. A pang of something that might have been jealousy shot through Lyra's chest, followed immediately by shame. How could she be envious of a dead woman? Especially one who died trying to do the right thing. Do you think that's why you saved me? She asked quietly. Because I remind you of her? The question hung between them like a blade, sharp with the potential to cut through whatever was growing between them. But Kieran's response was immediate and certain. No. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Sarah was light and hope and everything good about the world. You're something else entirely. What am I then? You're fire and determination, and the kind of courage that burns bridges to save strangers. You're not Sarah's echo, Lyra. You're your own song entirely. And that's exactly what I need. Before she could respond, the sound of boots on the porch steps broke the intimate moment. A knock at the door was followed immediately by Sage's voice, tight with urgency. Kieran, we've got a problem. They dressed quickly and emerged to find the entire pack gathered in the main room, their faces grim. Reaper stood by the window with a pair of binoculars, his massive frame tense with alertness. 3 vehicles on the access road, he reported without turning around. Military style, moving in formation. They're still about 10 miles out, but they're definitely heading this way. Hunters, Sage said grimly. Has to be. No one else would be stupid enough to approach this territory in broad daylight with that kind of firepower. Kieran moved to the window, accepting the binoculars from Reaper. Lyra watched his expression harden as he studied whatever was approaching. How did they find us? Finn asked, his youthful voice tight with fear. They didn't, Kieran said quietly, lowering the binoculars. They're not here for us. Then who? Sage began, but her eyes found Lyra, and understanding dawned. Oh. Marcus, Lyra whispered, pieces clicking into place. He called in his business partners. Kieran's nod was grim. The hunters who killed Sarah. The same ones he's been feeding information to for 20 years. He's decided that if he can't eliminate you himself, he'll let them do it. And probably collect a bounty for providing your location, Sage added darkly. Terror crawled up Lyra's spine as the implications hit her. I have to leave. I won't let them hurt you because of me. No. Kieran's voice brooked no argument. You're pack now. We don't abandon pack. But if I'm the reason they're coming, then we deal with it. His storm-gray eyes were hard as winter granite. Besides, I've been waiting 20 years for a chance to have a conversation with Sarah's killers. Looks like Christmas came early. Reaper cracked his knuckles with a sound like breaking bones. How do you want to play this, Alpha? Kieran's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The same way we've always played it, brother. We remind these hunters why smart humans avoid the deep woods. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher into a cloudless sky, painting the world in deceptively peaceful shades of gold and green. But in the distance, death was driving up the mountain road, and Lyra finally understood that her new life was about to be baptized in blood and silver. The only question was whose blood would be spilled when the shooting started. Chapter 6. Blood and Silver. The hunters came at them like a military operation, coordinated, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Lyra crouched behind the overturned table in what had been Kieran's peaceful cabin, her heart hammering as silver bullets shredded the walls around them. The pack had scattered according to plan. Finn and Sage circling wide to flank the attackers while Reaper held the eastern approach. But it was Kieran who'd become something beyond human understanding. She'd watched him transform in the moments before the attack began, but not into his wolf form. Instead, he'd become something darker, more primal. A living weapon forged from 20 years of grief and rage. Now he moved through the chaos like death itself, appearing and disappearing among the trees with inhuman grace. Stay down, he'd commanded before vanishing into the forest, and the authority in his voice had been absolute. But staying down while people she cared about risked their lives felt like cowardice. A scream split the air, not of pain, but of rage. Through the shattered window, Lyra saw one of the hunters flying backward through the air, his weapon spinning away into the underbrush. Kieran materialized from the shadows like a nightmare given form, his eyes blazing with that inner fire that marked him as something far more dangerous than an ordinary shifter. Where is she? She heard him snarl, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance. Where's the girl? The hunter he held by the throat was gasping, clawing at hands that might as well have been iron shackles. We don't know what you're talking about. Wrong answer. Kieran's free hand extended claws that gleamed like obsidian in the dappled sunlight. Let me rephrase. Marcus Aldrich hired you to eliminate a witness. Where is your rendezvous point with him? Another hunter appeared behind Kieran, rifle raised, but Reaper emerged from the opposite direction like a force of nature. The massive man moved with surprising speed for his size, covering the distance in heartbeats before the hunter could fire. The sound of breaking bones echoed across the clearing. "Kieran's asking nicely," Reaper said conversationally, his hands still wrapped around the hunter's now useless arms. "I'm not known for my patience." Through it all, Lyra found herself studying Kieran's face, memorizing the cold precision with which he extracted information. This was the legend she'd heard whispered about in pack stories. The ghost of Blood Moon Ridge, the alpha who'd single-handedly dismantled 3 corrupt pack hierarchies. But underneath the calculated violence, she could see the man who'd held her through nightmares, who'd offered sanctuary to broken souls. "The warehouse," the first hunter finally gasped. "Old lumber mill, 15 miles north. Marcus is waiting there with reinforcements." "How many?" Kieran's voice was deadly quiet. 20. Maybe more, armed with silver rounds and gas grenades loaded with wolfsbane extract. Sage's voice crackled through the comm device clipped to Kieran's shirt. "Alpha, we've got another vehicle approaching from the south. Looks like they left someone to watch the road." Kieran's gaze found Lyra through the broken window, and for a moment his expression softened. But when he turned back to the hunter, all warmth vanished. "You're going to tell your friends that the girl escaped, that she's headed east toward the interstate. Buy us time to relocate. And if I refuse," Kieran's smile was sharp as winter wind, "then you get to explain to Marcus why his hunting party never made it home." The hunter nodded frantically. Within minutes, the surviving attackers were fleeing down the mountain road, their weapons abandoned and their units scattered. But Lyra knew this was only the beginning. "We can't stay here," Sage said as the pack regrouped in the demolished cabin. Blood streaked her silver hair, and her clothes were torn, but her amber eyes burned with fierce satisfaction. "They'll be back with more people and better weapons." "The safe houses," Finn began, but Kieran cut him off with a shake of his head. "Too risky. Marcus knows about most of them from the old days." He looked around at his pack, his family, and Lyra could see the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden. "We split up. Temporary dispersal until we can neutralize the threat." "No." The word left Lyra's mouth before she could stop it, drawing every pair of eyes in the room. "I won't let you destroy what you've built because of me." "Lyra." "I mean it, Kieran. This is my fight. Marcus wants me dead because I know about his collaboration with hunters." "Fine. Let me end this." "Absolutely not." His voice carried the full weight of Alpha Command. "You're not trained for this kind of operation." "Then train me." She stood, moving to face him across the ruined furniture. "You said this pack was about choice, about people deciding their own destinies. Let me choose to fight." Reaper cleared his throat diplomatically. "Might I suggest a compromise?" They turned to him, and the big man's scarred face was thoughtful. "Marcus is expecting the girl to run, but what if instead she walked right into his trap?" "Explain," Kieran said, though his tone suggested he already didn't like where this was heading. "The warehouse is designed for an ambush. Multiple entry points, good sight lines, plenty of cover for shooters. But it's also isolated, which means if we control the perimeter, anything that happens inside stays private." Sage's eyes lit up with understanding. "A trap within a trap." "Exactly. Lyra goes in as bait, but she's not alone. The rest of us position ourselves to cut off escape routes and provide support when things go sideways." "When things go sideways?" Lyra asked. "Oh, they will," Finn said with grim certainty. "Marcus isn't stupid enough to honor any kind of truce, even if he promises one." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes distant as he calculated angles and possibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. "It could work, but there's no room for error. One mistake, One moment of hesitation, and we all die. We're already dead if we keep running, Lyra pointed out. At least this way, we go down fighting. You don't understand what you're asking. Kieran moved closer, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness. If something happens to you, if I lose you the way I lost Sarah, you won't. She covered his hands with hers, feeling the tremor that ran through his powerful frame. Because this time, you're not facing it alone. This time, you have a pack that stands with you. Around them, the others nodded their agreement. Even Finn, young as he was, straightened his shoulders with determination. Besides, Lyra continued, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Kieran's ears. I'm not Sarah. I'm not light and hope and everything good about the world. I'm fire and determination, remember? And sometimes, the only way to fight monsters is to become something just as dangerous. Kieran's laugh was rough with emotion. When did you become so bloodthirsty? About the time someone tried to murder me for doing the right thing. Her smile was sharp as his had been earlier. Turns out, betrayal is excellent motivation for violence. All right, he said finally, though she could see the cost of the decision in his eyes. But we do this my way. Complete coordination, no improvisation, and if I give the signal to abort, you run. No arguments, no heroics. Agreed. And afterward? His forehead touched hers, his breath warm against her skin. Afterward, we have a conversation about your apparent death wish. Afterward, she promised, we have a conversation about a lot of things. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks when they loaded into Reaper's battered pickup truck, leaving behind the sanctuary that had been home for 3 precious days. As they drove toward whatever waited at the lumber mill, Lyra found herself studying each member of the pack, memorizing their faces, their gestures, the way they moved together with the fluid coordination of a true family. If this went wrong, if Marcus's trap proved more deadly than their own, these might be the last peaceful moments any of them would have. But as Kieran's hand found hers in the darkness of the truck's cab, his fingers intertwining with hers with fierce possessiveness, Lyra realized she wasn't afraid. She was ready to burn the world down to protect what they'd built together. And judging by the predatory gleam in Kieran's storm-gray eyes, she wouldn't be burning it alone. Chapter 7. The Warehouse of Broken Promises. The abandoned lumber mill squatted against the darkening sky like a malignant tumor, its broken windows reflecting the last rays of sunset in shattered fragments. From their position on the ridge overlooking the facility, Lyra could see the trap Marcus had laid with military precision. Sniper positions in the upper floors, vehicles positioned to block escape routes, and enough firepower to level a small town. 23 hostiles. Sage whispered through the comm, her voice barely audible as she reported from her position on the eastern approach. Armed and positioned for a crossfire pattern, they're not planning to take prisoners. Kieran's jaw tightened as he studied the warehouse through high-powered binoculars. Marcus is in the main office on the 2nd floor. I can see him pacing by the windows. Nervous? Lyra asked, checking her borrowed tactical vest one final time. The silver-lined Kevlar felt strange against her skin, but Kieran had insisted on every precaution. Confident, he corrected grimly. He thinks he's already won. Reaper's voice crackled through from the south perimeter. Finn's in position at the power grid. On your word, Alpha. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Lyra would walk into the warehouse alone, drawing Marcus and his hunters into the open where the pack could engage them on more favorable terms. But as she prepared to descend the ridge, every instinct screamed that she was walking toward her death. Second thoughts? Kieran asked, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. Third and fourth thoughts, she admitted. But not about the plan. About us. His storm gray eyes found hers in the gathering darkness. What about us? If this goes wrong, if I don't make it out, I need you to know that these last few days have been the best of my life. That finding you, finding this pack, was worth everything that came before. Kieran's hands cupped her face with desperate tenderness. You're going to make it out. We all are. And then we're going to build something that makes these few days look like the prologue to our real story. Before she could respond, he kissed her, not the gentle, exploratory kiss they'd shared on the cabin steps, but something deeper, more desperate. A claiming and a promise wrapped in the taste of fear and determination. I love you, he whispered against her lips, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. I know it's too soon. I know you've been through hell, but I needed you to hear it before. I love you too, she interrupted, the admission spilling out with startling ease. Whatever happens down there, that's real. That's mine. For a moment, they simply held each other as the mountain wind whispered through the pines around them. Then Kieran pulled back, and the man who gazed at her with storm-gray eyes was no longer just her protector. He was her partner, her equal, her mate in every way that mattered. Bring me home, he said simply. Always. The descent to the warehouse felt like walking through a graveyard. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every sound might herald an early attack. But as Lyra approached the main entrance, she forced herself to project the image of a frightened, desperate woman seeking sanctuary, not the tactical asset she'd become over the past few days. The warehouse doors groaned open at her approach, revealing a cavernous space filled with rusted machinery and rotting lumber. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow pools, leaving vast areas shrouded in darkness where death could be waiting. Lyra Voss. Marcus's voice echoed from the shadows above. The little traitor finally comes home. She looked up to see him standing on a metal catwalk, flanked by 2 hunters with automatic weapons. The amber eyes that had once gazed at her with feigned affection now held nothing but cold calculation. "Hello, Marcus," she called back, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "I hear you've been looking for me." "Looking for you?" "My dear, I've been hunting you. There's a difference." He began descending the metal stairs with predatory grace. "You cost me a very lucrative partnership when you warned the Crescent Moon Pack. My associates are displeased. Your associates are the scum who murdered innocent families for money." Lyra shot back. "The same scum who killed Sarah Blackthorne 20 years ago." Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for her to know the barb had hit home. "Ah, yes, Sarah. Such a shame about her unfortunate accident. But then, people who ask too many questions often meet unfortunate ends." "Like me?" "Exactly like you." He reached the warehouse floor and began circling her like a predator playing with wounded prey. "Though, I must admit, I'm curious how you survived the borderlands. Those mountains are notoriously dangerous for lone wolves." "I had help." "From whom?" "Every pack for 100 miles knows you're marked for death. No sane alpha would risk harboring a fugitive with your reputation." Lyra allowed herself a small smile. "Who said anything about a sane alpha?" The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees as a new voice spoke from the shadows near the eastern entrance. "Hello, Marcus." "Miss me?" Kieran stepped into the light like vengeance given form, his presence transforming the entire dynamic of the confrontation. The hunters on the catwalk swung their weapons toward him, but he was already moving. Not toward them, but toward Lyra with fluid grace that spoke of absolute confidence in his pack's abilities. "Kieran Blackthorne," Marcus breathed, his face draining of color. "But you're supposed to be dead?" Kieran's smile was sharp as winter wind. "So I've heard," greatly exaggerated as it turns out. Around the warehouse, shadows began to move as the pack took their positions. Emergency lighting flickered and died as Finn cut the power grid, plunging the space into chaotic darkness broken only by muzzle flashes as the hunters opened fire. But in the chaos, Lyra felt Kieran's hand find hers, steady and sure despite the violence erupting around them. "Phase 2?" she asked. "Phase 2," he confirmed, and together they moved deeper into the warehouse where Marcus was already barking orders to his remaining men. The real hunt was just beginning. Above them, something crashed through one of the upper windows, Sage, dropping into the melee with lethal precision. Reaper's roar echoed from the southern entrance as he engaged a group of hunters trying to flank their position. The coordinated chaos was beautiful in its deadly efficiency. "You should have stayed dead, Blackthorn," Marcus snarled, drawing a silver-plated pistol from his jacket. "This time, I'll make sure it sticks." But Kieran was no longer the grieving widower who'd disappeared into the mountains 20 years ago. He was something far more dangerous now, an alpha with a pack worth protecting, and a mate worth dying for. "The difference between then and now," Kieran said as he and Marcus began circling each other like gladiators in an arena, "is that this time, I'm not fighting alone." As if summoned by his words, Lyra stepped out of the shadows behind Marcus, no longer the frightened exile seeking shelter, but a predator in her own right. In her hands was the silver knife she'd carried that first night in the forest, the only weapon she'd managed to grab before fleeing her old life. "And this time," she added quietly, "your victims are ready for you." The blade found its mark between Marcus's ribs with surgical precision, sliding past bone to pierce the heart that had orchestrated so much death and betrayal. His amber eyes went wide with shock as he looked down at the woman he'd tried to destroy. "That's for Sarah," Lyra whispered, "and for every innocent soul you sold to monsters." Marcus collapsed to his knees, then forward onto his face, his blood pooling on the warehouse floor like spilled wine. Around them, the sounds of battle were already fading as the leaderless hunters found themselves outmatched and surrounded. In the sudden silence, Kieran pulled Lyra against him with fierce possessiveness, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted of victory and promise and the beginning of forever. "Phase 3, she asked against his mouth. "Phase 3, he agreed. "We go home." Chapter 8. The Weight of Freedom. The safe house Sage had led them to was nothing like Kieran's mountain cabin, a nondescript ranch home tucked into a valley 30 miles from the warehouse, owned by a retired pack member who asked no questions and kept the pantry stocked. But as Lyra sat on the front porch steps watching the sun rise over unfamiliar peaks, it felt more like sanctuary than anywhere she'd ever been. "Can't sleep?" She turned to find Kieran emerging from the house, 2 steaming mugs in his hands and concern etched in the lines around his storm-gray eyes. He'd been watching her with that same worried intensity since they'd arrived 6 hours ago, as if he expected her to shatter at any moment. "Too much adrenaline," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "And too many thoughts." He settled beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Want to share some of them?" Lyra stared out at the valley, trying to find words for the chaotic mix of emotions churning in her chest. "I killed someone last night." Marcus killed himself the moment he chose to collaborate with hunters, Kieran said quietly. "You just expedited the process." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to help you understand that what you did wasn't murder. It was justice. There's a difference." She turned to study his profile, noting the way the morning light caught the silver threads at his temples. "How do you live with it? The violence? The blood? The knowledge that you've ended lives?" Kieran was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 decades worth of hard-won wisdom. I remind myself why I do it. Every corrupt alpha I've eliminated, every hunter I've put down, every life I've taken, it's been to protect innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. That doesn't make it easy, but it makes it necessary. And if it changes you, if you become the monster you're fighting, his hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that belied his capacity for violence. That's why I need you. Why I need them. He nodded toward the house where they could hear Finn's sleepy chatter mixing with Reaper's rumbling responses as breakfast was prepared. To remind me who I am underneath the legend. To keep me human. The simple admission cracked something open in her chest. Is that what I am to you? An anchor? You're everything. The words were spoken so softly she almost missed them. You're my conscience, my courage, my reason for believing that tomorrow might be better than today. You're the voice that tells me when to fight and when to heal, when to be the ghost of Blood Moon Ridge, and when to just be Kieran. Heat flooded her cheeks at the raw honesty in his tone. That's a lot of responsibility for someone you've known less than a week. Time isn't what matters. Connection is. Understanding. The recognition that you've found the other half of your soul. His thumb traced circles against her palm, sending warmth shooting up her arm. I knew Sarah for 3 years before I was certain she was my mate. I knew you were mine the moment you stepped out of that forest. Even covered in blood and running for my life? Especially then. You were fierce and frightened and absolutely determined to survive. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with spirit. Lyra leaned against his shoulder, inhaling the scent of pine and leather that had become home to her. What happens now? Marcus is dead, but there are still hunters out there. Still corrupt alphas making deals with humans who want us extinct. Now we do what we've always done, Kieran said, his arm tightening around her. We protect those who can't protect themselves. We offer sanctuary to the lost and broken. We build something better than what came before. And us? What do we become? The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. She could feel Kieran's heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong and infinitely reassuring. That depends, he said carefully, on what you want us to become. Before she could answer, the screen door creaked open behind them. Sage emerged with her own mug of coffee, her silver hair still mussed from sleep, but her amber eyes sharp with alertness. Sorry to interrupt, she said, settling on the porch railing across from them. But we need to talk about practical matters. Such as? Kieran asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what was coming. Such as the fact that 23 hunters went missing last night, along with their equipment and vehicles. That kind of disappearance doesn't go unnoticed in their community. There will be questions, investigations, possibly retaliation. Lyra felt Kieran tense beside her. How long do we have? Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. But Marcus's death is going to leave a power vacuum in the Shadowmere pack. And nature abhors a vacuum. Other alphas will move to claim his territory, his resources, his remaining partnerships. Let them, Lyra said with more venom than she'd intended. Maybe the new leadership will have more sense than to collaborate with murderers. Sage's smile was sharp as winter wind. Honey, you've been out of pack politics for less than a week. You haven't lost your naivety yet. Then enlighten me. Marcus wasn't unique. He was just one node in a network that spans half the continent. Alphas who've decided that collaborating with hunters is more profitable than protecting their own kind. His death sends a message, but it also makes them more cautious, more dangerous. The implications settled over Lyra like a shroud. So nothing's really changed. Everything's changed, Kieran corrected firmly. We've proven that they can be beaten, that their corruption has consequences, that there are still wolves willing to fight for what's right. And more importantly, Sage added with a meaningful look at their joined hands. You've given him something to fight for beyond vengeance. That changes everything. Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks, but she didn't pull away from Kieran's touch. If anything, she moved closer, drawing strength from his steady presence. So what's the plan? She asked. First, we relocate permanently, Kieran said. The mountain cabin was compromised the moment Marcus found it. We need somewhere more defensible, with better escape routes. I know a place, Sage offered. Old friend of mine has a compound in Montana. Isolated, well-fortified, and she owes me a favor or two. Second, Kieran continued, we expand our intelligence network. Marcus might be dead, but his records, his contacts, his financial arrangements, all of that information is still out there. We need to find it before someone else does. And third, Lyra prompted. Kieran's storm-gray eyes found hers, and in their depths she saw something that made her breath catch. Third, we decide what kind of life we want to build together. Whether you want to be part of this fight, or whether you'd prefer to start fresh somewhere safe and quiet. The choice hung between them like a crossroads. She could walk away from all of this, the violence, the constant danger, the weight of responsibility for other people's lives. Kieran would let her go if that's what she chose. She could see it in his eyes, the willingness to sacrifice his own happiness for her safety. I have a better idea, she said finally. Oh? Instead of deciding between fighting and hiding, why don't we do both? Build something worth protecting, then protect it with everything we have. She turned to face him fully, her hands framing his face with gentle determination. I don't want safe and quiet, Kieran. I want a life that matters. I want to wake up every morning knowing that what we do makes a difference. His smile was brilliant as sunrise. Even if it means more nights like last night, more danger, more violence, more impossible choices. Especially then, because those impossible choices led me to you, to this pack, to the first real family I've ever had. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. Besides, someone needs to keep the legendary ghost of Blood Moon Ridge from becoming too much of a legend, and not enough of a man. I love you, he whispered, the words carrying the weight of promise and possibility. I love you too. All of you. The protector, the warrior, the leader, the man who makes coffee at sunrise because he knows I can't sleep. She kissed him softly, tasting forever in the gentle press of his lips. So yes, I want to fight. I want to build something better. And I want to do it all with you. From inside the house came the sound of Finn's delighted laughter mixing with Reaper's deep chuckle, the ordinary music of family beginning their day. Sage watched them with satisfied approval before heading back inside, leaving them alone with the morning and the future spreading out before them like an unwritten story. Think we can really do it? Lyra asked. Change things for the better? With you? Kieran's arms tightened around her as the sun climbed higher into a cloudless sky. I think we can change the world. Chapter 9. The Claiming Moon. 3 weeks later, standing on the deck of their new Montana stronghold, Lyra understood why Sage's friend had chosen this place for her pack's sanctuary. The compound was built into the mountainside like a fortress, with natural stone walls and strategically placed buildings that could withstand everything from avalanches to coordinated attacks. But it was the view that took her breath away. Endless peaks stretching toward the horizon, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. Regrets? Kieran asked, moving up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. The simple gesture sent warmth spiraling through her, as it had every day since they'd arrived at Shadowhawk Ridge. About leaving civilization behind for a life of beautiful isolation with the man I love. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Not even one. Not even when Finn accidentally set the kitchen on fire trying to make you birthday pancakes. Especially not then. Her laugh was soft with affection. When was the last time someone tried to burn down a kitchen for you? Never, he admitted, his breath warm against her ear. I'm still not used to having people who care enough to risk property damage for my happiness. The admission carried weight that had nothing to do with pancakes and everything to do with the 20 years he'd spent in self-imposed exile. But that was changing, day by day, as he slowly learned to accept the love his pack offered so freely. Speaking of caring, Lyra said, turning in his arms to face him, Luna wants to perform the mating ceremony tomorrow night. Kieran went very still. Luna Ravencrest, the alpha who owned Shadowhawk Ridge, was old-school pack tradition in every way that mattered. Her offer to perform the ancient bonding ritual was both an honor and a recognition of their relationship's significance. Is that what you want? He asked carefully. The ceremony makes it official. Permanent. There's no going back once the moon witnesses our bond. Are you planning on going back? Never. The word was fierce with certainty. But I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. Mated wolves don't just love each other. They're bound on a level that goes beyond human emotion. You'll feel what I feel, know when I'm in danger, share my strength and my weaknesses. Lyra studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes. You're afraid. Terrified, he admitted. Not of binding myself to you. Of binding you to me. My life is dangerous, Lyra. My enemies become your enemies. My past becomes your burden to carry. Your pack becomes my family. Your strength becomes my strength. Your love becomes my anchor. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Besides, I thought we'd already established that I'm not exactly leading a safe, quiet life myself. Before he could respond, Reaper's voice carried across the deck from the communications center. Alpha, you need to see this. They found the big man hunched over a bank of monitors, his scarred face grim as he scrolled through encrypted messages. Sage stood behind him, her silver hair catching the light from the screens as she read over his shoulder. What is it? Kieran asked, immediately shifting into command mode. Intelligence from our contacts in the Hunter network, Sage said without looking up. Seems Marcus's death has created quite a stir in certain circles. Good stir or bad stir? Lyra asked, though something in Sage's tone suggested she already knew the answer. Depends on your perspective. The alphas who are collaborating with hunters are running scared, which means some of them are making mistakes. But the hunter leadership is displeased with their recent losses. Reaper pulled up a series of intercepted communications, his thick fingers surprisingly delicate on the keyboard. They're calling it the Montana incident. 23 operatives dead, millions in equipment lost, and their most reliable source of pack intelligence eliminated. They're putting together a task force, Sage continued. Military-trained specialists with advanced equipment.
And a final time, when its name is spoken no more. And so, they carved names into stone, painted them in ochre and gold, chanted them in ritual and feast, that they might never fade. Names became talismans, threads that tied the spirit to the world, each syllable a key to eternal presence. But even when the tombs crumble, even when wind scours the hieroglyphs smooth, memory survives in unexpected ways, in the voice of a storyteller, in the wide eyes of a child hearing a myth, in the silence of a soul who simply remembers. You, listener of this tale, keeper of this sacred thread, are now part of that remembering. As long as the name is known, as long as the story is told, the soul walks still among the stars. Sleep now, bearer of memory. For in your listening, the ancients live again. From the first hour of the world's breath, Ra, the sun god, has crossed the heavens in radiant splendor, his golden bark carving light into the sky. But when the sun sets, when dusk bleeds across the horizon like wine upon linen, Ra does not perish. He descends, Into the duat he goes, into the underworld's 12 shadowed hours, where serpents slither and stars weep. There he battles the serpent Apophis, the devourer of light, the chaos that coils at the edge of becoming. It is a sacred struggle, not of war, but of rhythm. For just as the heart must beat, just as breath must rise and fall, so too must light vanish to be reborn. Each dawn is a triumph, not merely of day, but of divine will, of the soul's refusal to be undone. And so Ra, eternal, rises anew with each morning, his face burning with the knowledge of death and the beauty of return. This too is the soul's cycle. This too is your journey. To descend is not to end. To fall is not to fail. For each dusk cradles a promise, and each night a waiting fire. Sleep now beneath Ra's gentle light. Know that even as the sun sets, it carries your name across the sky and will return, bearing dawn in its wake. In the beginning, before pyramids, before song, there was clay. The god Khnum, potter of creation, knelt at his wheel beside the Nile, and from the river's silt he shaped the first men. He pressed fingers into soft earth, loving, deliberate. And as he shaped the limbs and bones, another god leaned close and breathed. Tefnut, Shu, Atum, Ra, each added a whisper of life until the clay stirred and humanity was born, not as accident, but as intention. We are, each of us, earth that remembers the sky. Mortal, yes, we crack, we bleed, we fall back into soil, but the breath, that divine exhale, never fades. It lingers in our longing, in our questions, in the hush that follows a prayer spoken alone in the dark. Even the Book of the Dead knows this truth, that the body is a temporary vessel, but the soul is the echo of that first holy breath. So when we grieve, when we bury, when we scatter ashes to wind, we do not lose, we return. And in that return, we are remembered, reborn.
I'm fine. You're brooding. There's a difference. She tugged him toward a quieter corner of the room. What's really bothering you? Kieran was quiet for a moment, his storm-gray eyes distant. I spent 20 years running from this kind of confrontation. Hiding in the mountains, picking my battles carefully, never staying in one place long enough to build something worth defending. And now? Now I have something worth defending. Someone worth protecting. A pack that's become family. His fingers tightened around hers. The thought of putting you all at risk because of my past, my choices. Our choices, she corrected firmly. We decided to fight this fight together, remember? We decided to build something better and protect it with everything we have. That was before we knew they were mobilizing a small army to hunt us down. So we mobilize our own army. The words surprised her as they left her mouth, but once spoken, they felt absolutely right. Luna's pack, our contacts in the resistance network, every alpha who's sick of watching their people get slaughtered by human extremists. Kieran's eyes widened slightly. You're talking about open warfare. I'm talking about not going quietly into the night, about making it clear that there are consequences for hunting our kind. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. I'm talking about being worthy of the bond we're about to make. Around them, the others continued their planning, but Lyra only had eyes for the man whose love had become the center of her universe. Tomorrow night, under the witness of the full moon, they would bind themselves together in the most sacred of shifter traditions. But the bond between them already felt unbreakable, forged in shared danger and tempered by mutual trust. Are you sure? He asked one final time. About the ceremony, about this life, about standing with me against whatever comes? I've never been more sure of anything. She rose on her toes to brush her lips against his. Tomorrow night, you become mine, and I become yours. Let the hunters come. They'll learn what it means to threaten a mated pair. Kieran's smile was brilliant as moonlight. In that case, We'd better make sure we survive long enough to celebrate our honeymoon." As if summoned by his words, Luna's voice carried across the room with crisp authority. "Speaking of survival, we need to discuss defensive positions and evacuation protocols. This compound has weathered attacks before, but never against enemies this well-funded or determined." The planning session that followed was intense and thorough, covering everything from sniper positions to escape routes. But through it all, Lyra felt a growing sense of rightness about their choices. This was where she belonged, not hiding from the world, but standing ready to defend the people she loved against those who would destroy them. Tomorrow night, she would become Kieran's mate in every way that mattered. And then, together, they would face whatever storm was coming. The full moon couldn't rise fast enough. Chapter 10. Under the Blood Moon. The mating ceremony began at moonrise, when the silver orb crested the mountain peaks and bathed Shadowhawk Ridge in ethereal light. Lyra stood at the edge of the sacred circle, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Luna prepare the ancient ritual space with reverent precision. "Having second thoughts?" Sage asked quietly, moving up beside her with a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Third and fourth thoughts," Lyra admitted, echoing her words from weeks ago at the warehouse. "But not about Kieran, about whether I'm worthy of this." "The ceremony doesn't make you worthy, honey. It simply acknowledges what already exists." Sage's amber eyes were warm with affection. "Besides, if Kieran Blackthorn thinks you're his mate, who are we to argue with the ghost of Blood Moon Ridge?" Around them, the pack had gathered in the natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside. Not just Kieran's small family, but Luna's people as well. Wolves from a dozen different bloodlines and territories, united by choice rather than birth. It was exactly the kind of pack Lyra had dreamed of belonging to her entire life. "Where is he?" she asked, scanning the assembled wolves for Kieran's familiar form. "Alpha Tradition," Luna called from the center of the circle, her voice carrying easily in the crisp night air. "The male approaches last, after the moon has witnessed the female's commitment to the bond." Lyra stepped into the sacred space, feeling the weight of ancient magic settling around her like a cloak. The circle was marked with silver stones that seemed to glow with their own inner light, and the air hummed with power that made her wolf restless beneath her skin. "Lyra Voss," Luna began, her voice taking on the formal cadence of ritual. "Do you come to this circle of your own free will, seeking to bind yourself to Kieran Blackthorn in the ancient way of our people?" "I do." The words left her lips steady and sure, despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Do you understand that this bond, once forged, cannot be broken save by death? That his enemies become your enemies, his pack becomes your pack, his strength becomes your strength?" "I understand." "And do you swear before the moon and these witnesses to stand beside him in darkness and light, in peace and war, until the last breath leaves your body?" Lyra thought of everything that had brought her to this moment. The betrayal that had driven her into the wilderness, the terror of that first night in the forest, the gradual blooming of trust and love that had transformed her from a broken exile into a woman ready to claim her destiny. "I swear it." The moon seemed to pulse brighter at her words, and she felt something shift in the air around them. Magic, ancient and primal, recognizing her commitment and marking her as worthy. "Then let the male approach," Luna commanded, "and declare his intentions before moon and pack." Kieran emerged from the shadows at the circle's edge, and Lyra's breath caught at the sight of him. He'd painted his face and chest with traditional silver markings that traced the lines of his tattoos, transforming him into something that was part man, part legend, part force of nature. When his storm-gray eyes found hers across the sacred space, she felt the bond between them pulse like a living thing. "Kieran Blackthorn," Luna continued as he entered the circle. Do you come seeking to claim this woman as your mate? To bind your life to hers in the sight of moon and pack? I do. His voice carried across the amphitheater with the weight of absolute certainty. She is not of your original pack, not of your bloodline, not born to your territory. Do you claim her nonetheless as your equal, your partner, your other half? I claim her as all of these things and more. Kieran moved to stand opposite her in the circle, close enough to touch but separated by the ancient protocol of the ritual. I claim her as my conscience, my courage, my reason for believing in tomorrow. I claim her as the fire that burns away my darkness and the light that guides me home. Tears blurred Lyra's vision at the raw honesty in his voice. This man, this legend who had once seemed untouchable in his grief and isolation, was offering her everything he was, everything he had, everything he could ever become. And do you swear, Luna pressed, to protect her above all others, to share your strength when she is weak, to be her shelter in the storm, and her peace in the chaos? I swear it on my life, on my pack, on the memory of those I've lost and the hope of those yet to come. Then join hands, and let the moon witness what is spoken between you. Lyra stepped forward at the same moment Kieran did, their fingers intertwining in the center of the circle. The moment their skin touched, electricity shot up her arm, and she gasped at the intensity of the connection. Now speak your private vows, Luna instructed, the words meant for each other alone. Kieran's eyes never left hers as he spoke, his voice low and intimate despite their audience. 20 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. I thought love was something that only brought pain. That connection was just another weakness for enemies to exploit. You taught me I was wrong. You showed me that love isn't something that makes you vulnerable. It's something that makes you invincible. You are my heart, Lyra, my home, my forever. You saved me, she whispered back, her thumbs tracing circles against his palms. Not just from Marcus, not just from the hunters, but from a life of believing I wasn't worth saving. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and you helped me become the woman I was always meant to be. You are my strength, Kieran. My anchor. My destiny. The moon pulsed overhead as their words settled into the sacred space, and Lyra felt something fundamental shift inside her. Not just emotional connection, but something deeper. A recognition that went beyond conscious thought. Now, Luna said, her voice heavy with ancient power. Let the bond be sealed. She approached them with a silver chalice filled with something that smelled like moonlight and wild herbs. Drink, and let your essences mingle as your lives have mingled. They drank from the cup together, the liquid burning down Lyra's throat like liquid fire. The moment it hit her stomach, the world exploded into sensation. She could feel Kieran's heartbeat as if it were her own, could sense his emotions like a second layer of consciousness beneath her thoughts. Love. Fierce, protective, absolute love that took her breath away. It is done, Luna declared as they stood swaying in the aftermath of the bonding. What was two is now one. What was separate is now united. Let none challenge this bond, for it has been witnessed by moon and pack and sealed in the ancient way. The assembled wolves erupted into celebration, howls rising into the night sky in a song of joy and acceptance. But Lyra barely heard them. She was lost in the storm-gray eyes of her mate, feeling their souls settle into perfect alignment. How do you feel? Kieran asked, his voice rough with emotion. Complete, she breathed. Like I've been carrying half a heart my entire life and just now found the missing piece. Before he could respond, the sharp crack of a rifle shot split the night air. One of the silver stones marking the sacred circle exploded in a shower of sparks, and suddenly the celebration transformed into chaos. Snipers! Reaper's voice boomed across the amphitheater as wolves scattered for cover. Multiple positions on the eastern ridge! More shots rang out, silver bullets designed to cause maximum damage to shifter physiology. But as Lyra crouched behind an outcropping with Kieran's body shielding hers, she felt no fear. Only a cold, brilliant rage that their perfect moment had been shattered by enemies who would never understand what they'd just witnessed. The hunters, she said, and it wasn't a question. Their timing is impeccable, Kieran agreed grimly, his eyes already scanning for threats and escape routes. But they made one critical error. Which is... His smile was sharp as moonlight on steel. They waited until after the ceremony. Now they're not just threatening my pack, they're threatening my mate. Through their new bond, Lyra felt his fury rise like a tide, and something wild and fierce responded in her own chest. These hunters thought they understood what they were fighting. They thought Kieran Blackthorn was dangerous when he was alone and grieving. They were about to learn what he was capable of when he had something worth protecting. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 11. Fire and Silver. The mate bond changed everything about how they fought. Lyra had expected the
course of history twisted, not with the weight of armies, but with the unseen pull of the divine. Constantine would go on to win, not just battles, but the soul of an empire. He did not merely embrace Christianity, he transfigured Rome with it. He baptized its bones. He turned temples into churches and gave bishops the keys to power. But even that was not enough. Rome, with its old gods and aging walls, could no longer hold the dream. It needed a new vessel, a new heart. A city not of 7 hills, but of 7 councils yet to come. And so, on the shores of the Bosphorus, where Asia meets Europe and the sea parts like prophecy, he built it, Nova Roma, the new Rome. But it would soon be known by another name, Constantinople. A city crowned in divine ambition, laid in golden bricks and sacred geometry, not born of myth, but born to become myth. Here, he envisioned not just a new capital, but a heavenly mirror on earth. A city without sin, a city bathed in light. With one foot in Plato's philosophy and the other in the Sermon on the Mount, Constantine crafted a place where Caesar might kneel before Christ and still rule, where empire and eternity might entwine. But what begins in stone rarely stays sacred. Power is a fire, and every altar is also a battleground. Even as Constantine shaped a Christian empire, the old divisions lingered. Pagan senators grumbled in the west. Eastern bishops argued over the nature of Christ. And within his own bloodline, betrayal bloomed. His sons would divide the realm. His successors would spill faith into politics and turn doctrine into war. Still, the dream held. Like a fragile flame cupped in trembling hands, the new Rome had been born. And though Constantine died, as all emperors do, his vision did not. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles, among 12 empty tombs, meant for the disciples of Christ, as if to say, I too walk among the sacred. I too am eternal. And thus the Byzantine Empire was conceived, not in clarity, but in tension, not in peace, but in transformation. An empire baptized in river and blood, a civilization that would bear the weight of heaven and earth upon its back. It was not yet called Byzantine. It did not yet know its trials, but it had begun to dream. Tonight, as you close your eyes and drift across the ages, hear the hymn rise in Latin and fall in Greek. See the flame flicker above the Bosphorus, where Constantine once walked alone beneath the stars and saw the future dressed in light. In the hush between centuries, where myth begins to harden into marble and the dust of old gods still clings to temple walls, there rises a city not born from earth, but summoned from vision, Constantinople. The name alone carries the cadence of incense. It does not speak, it intones, a place stitched from prophecy and power, neither east nor west, but between, a mirror of heaven floating on the waters of the Bosphorus, as Rome sank into the mire of
us. So we're changing the rules. She felt Kieran's surprise through their bond, followed quickly by understanding and fierce pride. Her mate was learning to trust her tactical instincts just as she'd learned to trust his. Luna, I need your people to fall back to the secondary perimeter and hold there. Don't advance, don't chase. Just create a solid wall they can't break through. Acknowledged, came Luna's crisp response. What about the eastern approach? Leave that to us. Lyra was already moving, following the battle map in her mind that flowed from Kieran's experience and her own growing understanding of the terrain. Sage, can you and your team create a distraction near the motor pool? Something loud and flashy? With pleasure. Sage's voice crackled back, amusement clear despite the circumstances. Finn, I need you to do something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Those are my favorite kind of assignments, the young wolf said with a grin that reminded her why she'd grown so fond of him. Cut the main power to the compound. All of it. Then give me exactly 60 seconds of emergency lighting before cutting that too. 60 seconds of... Wait, you want to fight them in the dark? No, Lyra said, feeling Kieran's understanding flow through their bond like warm honey. I want to fight them blind while we hunt by scent and sound. They're using technology to even the odds. Time to remind them what it means to face actual predators. The plan came together with the fluid coordination that only a true pack could achieve. Sage's diversionary explosions drew half the attacking force toward the motor pool, where they found themselves trapped in a crossfire between Luna's disciplined defenders. The power grid went dark exactly on schedule, plunging the compound into absolute blackness that favored shifter senses over human technology. And in that darkness, Lyra discovered what it truly meant to hunt alongside her mate. They moved through the night like paired shadows, their bond allowing them to coordinate without words or signals. Where Kieran drove enemies into the open with overwhelming force, Lyra was waiting with silver blades and preternatural timing. Where she identified threats through scent and sound, he eliminated them with the lethal precision of 20 years' experience. It was beautiful and terrible and completely intoxicating. Behind you, she breathed, not needing to specify direction. Through their connection, Kieran could feel exactly where she meant, could sense the hunter's position as clearly as if he'd spotted the threat himself. The enemy fell without ever realizing what had killed him. Two more moving toward the communications bunker. Kieran's mental voice whispered across their bond. Can you... She was already moving, her newly awakened hunting instincts guiding her through terrain she'd only known for weeks, but that now felt like home territory. The hunters were using night vision equipment, but their technology couldn't track a shifter moving with supernatural grace through familiar ground. By the time the emergency lighting flickered back to life, the battle was over. 12 hunters lay scattered across Shadowhawk Ridge, their high-tech equipment useless against enemies who fought with claws and fangs, and a coordination born of supernatural bonds. The survivors, those wise enough to retreat when the tide turned, would carry word back to their superiors about what they'd encountered in the Montana mountains. Lyra found Kieran standing over the body of what had clearly been the enemy commander, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths as he came down from the battle rush. When he looked up and saw her approaching, his storm-gray eyes held an expression she'd never seen before. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You," he said simply. "The way you coordinated the defense, the way you moved in the darkness, the way you..." He gestured helplessly. "You were magnificent." Heat flooded her cheeks. "We were magnificent. That coordination, I couldn't have done any of it without the bond, without feeling your instincts and experience flowing through our connection." And I couldn't have maintained that level of tactical awareness without your emotional anchor keeping me grounded. He crossed the distance between them in quick strides, pulling her against him with fierce possessiveness. 20 years of fighting alone, and then suddenly I have a partner who anticipates my moves, covers my weaknesses, makes me better than I ever was by myself. Through their bond, she felt the depth of his wonder, his gratitude, his absolute certainty that this was how things were always meant to be. But underneath the joy, she sensed something else, a darker current that made her pull back to study his face. "What is it?" Kieran's expression grew serious as he gestured toward the dead commander. This wasn't their main force. The equipment, the coordination, this was a probing attack. They wanted to test our defenses, see how we respond to pressure. Which means the real assault is still coming. His arms tightened around her. Tonight proved we can fight as a mated pair, that the bond makes us stronger rather than more vulnerable. But it also proved that our enemies are more dangerous than we thought. Around them, the pack was regrouping, tending wounds and assessing damage with the efficient calm of people who'd survived far worse. But even in victory, Lyra could feel the tension that came with knowing this was only the beginning. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Not long. Maybe days, maybe hours." Kieran's smile was sharp as moonlight on steel. "But let them come." Tonight, they learned what it means to face the ghost of Blood Moon Ridge and his mate. Next time, we'll teach them what it means to threaten our family. The mate bond hummed between them with shared determination and unshakable love. Whatever came next, they would face it together, two hearts beating as one, two souls joined in purpose, two predators united in the defense of everything they held dear. The hunters wanted a war. They were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong enemies to make it personal against. Chapter 12. Dawn of the New Pack. The final assault came with the breaking dawn, just as Lyra had known it would. She stood on the highest watchtower of Shadowhawk Ridge, watching 3 columns of military vehicles wind their way up the mountain roads like mechanical serpents. Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran's grim satisfaction from his position coordinating the pack's defenses below. They'd spent the night preparing for this moment, not just tactical preparations, but something deeper. 60 vehicles. Reaper's voice crackled through the comms from his sniper position. Maybe 300 hostiles. They're not taking any chances this time. "Good," Lyra said, surprising herself with the cold confidence in her voice. "It means they understand what they're facing." The truth was, she understood what they were facing too. This wasn't just about eliminating witnesses or protecting corrupt pack alliances anymore. This was about 2 fundamentally different visions of the world. One where shifters lived in the shadows, accepting whatever scraps of existence humans allowed them, and another where they stood tall as the apex predators they were born to be. Lyra. Luna's voice came through both the comms and from behind her as the older alpha climbed the tower stairs. "Are you ready for this?" "I don't think anyone can be ready for what's coming," Lyra admitted, turning to face the woman who'd performed their mating ceremony just hours ago. "But I'm not afraid." "You should be. A little fear keeps you alive in situations like this." Luna moved to stand beside her, studying the approaching forces with the calm assessment of someone who'd survived decades of conflicts. "But I can see why Kieran chose you. You have the same quality Sarah had. The ability to see past the immediate danger to what we're really fighting for." Through the mate bond, Lyra felt Kieran's sharp attention, his emotional response to hearing his first mate's name spoken with such respect. But there was no pain now, no guilt, only a warm gratitude for the love he'd known and lost, and a fierce determination to protect the love he'd found again. "She'd be proud of you both," Luna continued quietly. "Of what you've built together, of the stand you're making here." Before Lyra could respond, Kieran's voice filled the comms with calm authority. All units, this is Alpha. Primary force is splitting into 3 attack vectors as anticipated. Execute Omega Protocol on my mark. Omega Protocol, their final gambit, the strategy they developed during the long night hours when sleep had been impossible. It was audacious, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also the only way to end this war permanently. Luna, Lyra said, not taking her eyes off the approaching army. Are your people clear about their roles? Crystal clear, though I still think you're both certifiably insane for what you're planning. Probably. Lyra checked her equipment one final time. Not weapons, but something far more important. But if we're going to do this, we might as well do it with style. She made her way down the tower stairs, feeling the weight of destiny settling around her like armor. Every choice she'd made, every betrayal she'd survived, every moment of pain and growth had led to this. She was no longer the broken exile who'd stumbled into Kieran's territory weeks ago. She was Lyra Blackthorn, mate to the most feared alpha in North America, and it was time the world learned what that meant. The central courtyard of Shadowhawk Ridge was eerily quiet as she crossed it, the pack having taken their positions according to plan. But she could feel them through her enhanced senses. Sage coordinating the evacuation routes, Finn manning the communication arrays, Reaper providing overwatch from his elevated position. Her family, ready to fight and die for each other if necessary. She found Kieran in the main hall, studying tactical displays with the focused intensity that had made him a legend. When he looked up and saw her approaching, his expression softened into something that was pure love and absolute trust. Second thoughts? He asked, echoing their old ritual. Not even one, she replied, and meant it. You? Only about letting you take the most dangerous part of this plan. We've been through this. The hunters want me specifically. I'm the witness who can expose their entire network. That makes me the perfect bait. She moved into his arms, drawing strength from his solid presence. Besides, I won't be alone. No, he agreed, his forehead touching hers. You won't be. The mate bond hummed between them with shared purpose and unshakable determination. Through their connection, she could feel his absolute faith in her abilities, his pride in the woman she'd become, his certainty that whatever happened next, they would face it together. Incoming transmission. Finn's voice interrupted from the communications center. They want to talk. Kieran and Lyra exchanged a look of dark amusement. Put them through. The voice that filled the hall was crisp, military precise, and utterly without warmth. This is Colonel Harrison, commanding officer of the Special Supernatural Threats Division. You are harboring a fugitive wanted in connection with terrorist activities against human populations. Surrender Lyra Voss immediately, and the rest of your people will be allowed to leave unharmed. This is Kieran Blackthorn, Kieran replied, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smart people reconsider their life choices. And I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. There is no Lyra Voss here. Don't play games, Blackthorn. We know she's there. We know what you are, what all of you are. The age of hiding in the shadows is over. On that, Colonel, we agree completely. Kieran's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The age of hiding is over, but not in the way you think. You have 1 hour to surrender the fugitive. After that, we consider this compound a hostile target and act accordingly. The transmission cut off, leaving them in silence that felt charged with possibility. 1 hour, Lyra mused. That's barely enough time. It's enough, Kieran said with absolute confidence. Finn, signal our allies. It's time. What happened next would be talked about in pack histories for generations. The response to their call was immediate and overwhelming. From hidden valleys and remote territories across 3 states, Packs began emerging into the daylight. Not just a few rebels or outcasts, but entire communities of shifters who'd been waiting for someone to give them a reason to stop hiding. By the time Colonel Harrison's deadline arrived, Shadowhawk Ridge was surrounded, not by his forces, but by nearly 1,000 shifters representing dozens of different packs and bloodlines. They came as wolves and bears, as ravens and mountain cats, as creatures of legend stepping out of myth to stand in the morning sunlight. "This is impossible," Harrison's voice crackled over the comms, his earlier confidence replaced by poorly concealed panic. "How many of you are there?" "More than you ever imagined," Lyra replied, standing on the main balcony where every eye, human and shifter alike, could see her. "We are not fugitives, Colonel. We are not terrorists. We are the apex predators of this continent, and we're done pretending to be anything less." Through the mate bond, she felt Kieran's fierce pride, his absolute certainty that this moment would change everything. Around them, their pack, their family, stood ready to fight or negotiate as needed. "You wanted to end the age of hiding," she continued, her voice carrying across the valley with supernatural clarity. "Congratulations. You've just forced every pack in North America to choose between continued secrecy and open war, and they've chosen to stand with us." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, one by one, Harrison's forces began to withdraw. Faced with odds that made victory impossible and defeat catastrophic, even military training couldn't overcome basic survival instincts. "This isn't over." Harrison's voice was tight with rage and fear. "You're right," Kieran said, moving to stand beside his mate as the sun climbed higher into a cloudless sky. "It's just beginning. But next time you want to threaten pack leaders, Colonel, remember what happened here. Remember that we're not hiding anymore." As the last of the government vehicles disappeared down the mountain roads, Lyra found herself surrounded by more family than she'd ever dreamed possible. Packs that had been enemies for generations were talking, sharing stories, planning for a future where they didn't have to live in fear. "So," Sage said, approaching with her usual wry smile, "what do we do for an encore?" "Now," Kieran said, his arm tightening around Lyra's waist. "We build the world we want to live in. A world where our children can run free under the full moon without fear of hunters. A world where being a shifter isn't something to hide, but something to celebrate." Lyra looked out at the gathering of packs, at the friends who'd become family, at the mate who'd shown her what it meant to be truly loved. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but bright with possibility. "Forever?" she asked, echoing their old ritual one last time. "Forever," Kieran confirmed. And in the golden light of the Montana morning, forever didn't seem nearly long enough.